It would seem the legendary George R.R. Martin was quite inspired by history, especially the British past, as much of the Game of Thrones material seems to have a historical basis. Just as well as characters we discussed in the previous video, we see events in Game of Thrones somewhat resembling periods in our own history. Even the Westeros map itself, given with a bit of tweaking, is undeniably Britain placed on top of an inverted island, but on a much larger scale. 60 times larger in fact, as George R.R. Martin has stated in interviews that the continent is roughly the size of South America. Here are 5 striking similarities between history and Game of Thrones. As always, sit back and enjoy. The Red Wedding. The Red Wedding is an incident in the 9th episode of the 3rd season of Game of Thrones, and is a massacre during the War of the Five Kings, seemingly organised by Lord Walder Frey, in revenge for King Robb Stark breaking a marriage pact between the two houses. The slaughter results in the death of King Robb, Queen Talia, and Robb's mother, Lady Catelyn, along with many others, including most of Robb's bannermen and men-at-arms. However, the breaking of the marriage pact was apparently just a cover-up for the real reason for the massacre, and the true mastermind was Tywin Lannister, who plotted with Frey and Lord Roose Bolton to betray the Northern Army in return for mercy and rewards. Amid such violence and bloodshed, it's hard to think that George R.R. Martin may have got the inspiration for the Red Wedding from 2 real-life Scottish events in history. The first is suggested to be the Black Dinner, which involved the Douglas families, who were an ancient Scottish clan and one of Scotland's most powerful groups during the late Middle Ages. They had a big influence behind the throne of the Stuart Kings, and were seen as a threat to the security of the nation. While in 1440, 16-year-old William Douglas and his younger brother were invited to what they assumed would be a peaceful dinner with the 10-year-old King James II of Scotland. The meeting had been arranged by the Lord Chancellor Sir William Crichton. As the groups dined in Edinburgh Castle, a black bull's head was brought out and presented to young William. This was the symbol of death. Shortly after, William and his brother were dragged out to Castle Hill, where a mock trial took place and the 2 boys were beheaded in front of the young king. In retaliation, the Douglas clan attacked the castle, inflicting tremendous damage and bloodshed. That is the first similar real-life event to the Red Wedding. The second is the Massacre of Glencoe. This massacre took place in Glencoe on the evening of February 1692, when redcoat soldiers from the Duke of Argyll regiment, who had been staying with the people of Glencoe for the previous 11 days, began an indiscriminate massacre of their hosts, the MacDonalds. By the morning, 38 men, women and children were mercilessly slain by the very people they had welcomed into their home. The government claimed it was a clan vendetta between the MacDonalds and the Campbells. However, there was public outrage at the betrayal by the Campbells, who had butchered people who had shown them perfect Highland hospitality for the previous 11 to 12 days. They had fed them and put a roof over their heads, only to be attacked whilst they slept, completely unaware. It was known as murder under trust, and for that reason became one of the most treacherous acts in Highland history. The Massacre of Glencoe, the Black Dinner, and the Game of Thrones Red Wedding all share one thing in common: they were carried out under friendly invitation on unsuspecting victims. The Battle of Blackwater. The Battle of Blackwater was the largest battle in the War of the Five Kings, and was an attempt by Stannis Baratheon to take King's Landing and seize the Iron Throne from King Joffrey Baratheon. The battle was fought using naval assault and land attacks. Tyrion Lannister led the defence of the city, and was able to successfully destroy parts of Stannis' fleet by using wildfire. And although initially he could not stop them landing and gaining the walls of the city, later reinforcements from Lord Tywin Lannister, Mace Tyrell and Loras Tyrell meant eventually they defeated Stannis' army and won an emphatic victory in the name of King Joffrey. It's been suggested that this battle resembles the real-life Second Arab Siege of Constantinople in 717, when the Muslim Arabs launched a land and sea attack against the capital city of the Byzantine Empire. Similar to the wildfire used in Game of Thrones, the Byzantine navy used Greek fire to defeat the Arabs. Greek fire was an intercentrary weapon used by the Byzantine Empire, who typically deployed it in naval battles, and it became a crucial weapon in defense of their lands. It was a secret liquid mixture which was heated and pressurized, then delivered through a siphon and projected onto the enemy. In fact, much like wildfire in Game of Thrones, which is created by the Alchemist Guild, who heavily guards its formula, the exact concoction of Greek fire was so secret, even today no one has been able to replicate the mixture, as it seems the formulation died out with the Empire. Although it is suggested it could have been a mix of petroleum, quicklime, sulfur and nitrate. Whatever it was made of, its ability to burn on water and stick to surfaces meant it was a very effective weapon, and bizarrely, it was said to only be extinguishable by sand, vinegar or urine. So much like wildfire's heavy influence in the Battle of Blackwater, Greek fire ensured Byzantine military victories, most notably the salvation of Constantinople from 2 Arab sieges, therefore securing the empire's survival. The Battle of the Bastards. Battle of the Bastards, featured in the 9th episode of the 6th season, was written by series co-creator David Benioff and D.B. Weiss, and directed by Miguel Sapochnik. It's a battle late in the War of the Five Kings, in which Jon Snow and Sansa Stark retake Winterfell from Lord Ramsay Bolton, and restore House Stark as the ruling house of the North. And even by the show's own gruesome standards, this battle is on a different level. It was praised as one of the best ever episodes of Game of Thrones, and its creators admitted they drew inspiration from real-life battles. But which ones exactly? Well, there are 2 main ones. Firstly, the Battle of Cannae, which was the bloodiest battle the ancient world had ever seen. On August 2nd, 216 BC, Carthaginian army general Hannibal clashed with 8 Roman legions near the Italian city of Cannae. Despite being heavily outnumbered, Hannibal used a famous double envelopment tactic to surround the Romans and trap their army, similar to how Ramsay Bolton trapped Jon Snow and his men during the Battle of the Bastards. By the time the Battle of Cannae ended, at least 50,000 legionaries had been killed, and Rome faced the biggest crisis in its history. The battle is still viewed as one of the greatest tactical feats in military history. The second is the American Civil War, which was fought in the United States from 1861 to 1865. It was prompted by the controversy over slavery and the states' rights, and shortly after the war, Abraham Lincoln was elected. Throughout the war, many innovations in warfare occurred, most notably the development and use of ironclad ships that subsequently changed naval strategy around the world. On the contrary, many of the battles during the Civil War were fought with soldiers being crammed into the battlefield. Game of Thrones co-creator David Benioff said this: "The Battle of the Bastards becomes incredibly compact. All these men, all these combatants, crammed into this incredibly tight space on the battlefield. You read accounts of the battles in the Civil War, where they were piled so thick it was actually an obstruction on the battlefield." The Civil War ended when General Robert E. Lee surrendered to General Ulysses S. Grant at the Battle of Appomattox. However, there was a substantial cost, and after 4 years of intense fighting, between 620,000 to 750,000 soldiers lost their lives. To put that into perspective, that was more than the number of American military deaths in World War I and II combined. On the upside, the Confederacy collapsed, slavery was abolished, and 4 million slaves were freed. Following the war, the process of restoring national unity started, and civil rights were granted to freed slaves throughout the country. The American Civil War is the most examined and written about periods in American history, so it's no surprise the Game of Thrones directors used this in the drawing board for the Battle of the Bastards. The Red Faith. R'hllor is a prominent god in Essos, who is also recognised as the Lord of Light, the Heart of Fire, the God of Flame and Shadow. But in Westeros, he only has a modest following, and he is better known as the Red God. Everything about him is red, his symbol is a fiery red heart, and red priests led prayer to him in red temples. The faith is based on a dualistic, Manichaean view of the world. There are two opposing gods, R'hllor, the god of light, heart, and life, and his opposite, known as the Great Other, who is a god of ice and death. The two are locked in a struggle over the destiny of the world that is prophesied can only be ended when Azor Ahai, the hero figure, returns and wields a flaming sword, raising dragons from the stone. Surprisingly, the Red Faith is thought to be inspired by the real-life Zoroastrianism belief. Zoroastrianism was founded by the prophet Zoroaster over 3,500 years ago, and is one of the world's oldest monotheistic religions. It was once one of the most powerful religions in the world, but in recent years, followers have dwindled and is now the smallest, with less than 190,000 supporters worldwide. Zoroastrians primarily believe in one god called Ahura Mazda, who single-handedly created the world, and it's widely felt that they are fire worshippers. Although this is not true, they actually believe that fire represents God's light. Following traditional prayer several times a day and worshipping in the fire temple, Zoroastrians' equivalent to the Bible is called the Avesta, a scripture that has an old and a new part. The older part containing gathas, which are hymns thought to be composed by Zoroaster himself, and the newer part includes myths, stories, and ritual observations. The War of the Five Kings. The War of the Five Kings was a large multi-theatre war fought for control of the Iron Throne of Westeros after King Robert's death, due to a dispute over the rightful heir, after doubt arose surrounding his children's lineage and Robert's brothers both claiming themselves the heir by right of blood. All in all, it involved Joffrey, Stannis and Renly Baratheon, Robb Stark and Balon Greyjoy, with Robb Stark's involvement to seek revenge on his father's execution on false charges of treason, and Balon Greyjoy seizing an opportunity to declare the Iron Islands independent once more. The War of the Five Kings is the main military battle depicted in the first three novels of the Song of Ice and Fire series, and its aftermath and successor conflicts continue in the latest two books. The concept of the war loosely resembles the real-life War of the Roses that took place in England between 1455 and 1487. The battles were between supporters of the House of Lancaster and the House of York, who, similar to the War of the Five Kings, were trying to claim rights to the English throne, as both houses were descendants of the late King Edward III. The war got its name from the symbols used by the two sides, with the red rose representing the Lancastrians and the white rose representing the Yorkists. The wars consisted of 8 main battles and 5 principal leaders. The unrest started during the reign of Henry VI, with concerns over his frequent bouts of insanity affecting his ability to produce an heir. Although the War of the Roses is often described as a civil war, as is the War of the Five Kings, it was more of a battle between two noble families and lasted for many years, becoming very violent and didn't end until 1485, when in the Battle of Bosworth, Henry Tudor and his Lancastrian supporters defeated the Yorkists and Richard III was killed. After this, Henry Tudor was crowned Henry VII, and the new Tudor dynasty took over England. In summary, both wars were a fight for the crown, over confusion and disagreements of rights to it. Some have even said that the War of the Roses was George R.R. Martin's inspiration for the entire Game of Thrones concept. What do you think? So that's 5 similarities between real-life history and Game of Thrones. I hope you've enjoyed, and let us know if you have spotted any more historical parallels in the show or in the books. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.